I think that we can all agree that currently there is not a football boot that will make you a better player, but that is not to say that football boots aren't extremely important. Just don't tell that to the guy on your team who blames his boots every time he skies a free kick. In a game where you predominantly use your feet, you can't tell me that what you put on your feet doesn't matter at all. And while I don't think one boot will necessarily make you play better, I do think that some football boots are objectively better than others. So with that idea in mind, based on various reasons that I'll explain throughout the video, today I'm going to share with you my picks for the top 5 best performing football boots of 2020. I did one of these videos last year and the amount of change is actually pretty surprising, and I chose to keep this to a top 5 rather than doing a top 10 because I wanted it to be as exclusive as possible. And if I'm being honest, I really feel like these 5 separate themselves from everything else. Although I will spoil the ending for you, there are 5 honorable mentions of boots that I also think are really good, but not quite top 5 worthy. Also, all of the boots that I'll be mentioning in this video, you can purchase for yourself via the links down below in the description, where there are exclusive SR4U coupon codes to pick up all of these boots below their normal retail prices. If you guys enjoy the top 5 videos and want to see more, don't forget to support this one with a like. And if you're new here watching for the first time and don't want to miss out on weekly videos on everything football boots, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. With all that out of the way, let's get right into the list. At the 5 spot, we have the Puma Future 5.1, and I'll be honest with you guys in saying that I had a really difficult time picking the 5th best performing boot on the market right now, because I think that there are basically 6 others that you could have put in this position, but ultimately I decided on the Future 5.1. One, because I think it's arguably the most comfortable football boot on the market right now, at least one of them. This new knitted upper that we haven't seen on previous generations of the Puma Future. It's soft, it's flexible, it really does feel like a pair of socks. If you prefer a slightly more padded sensation, but also a boot that's not overly bulky, I think you'll really like the touch on offer here. The net fit system is definitely not what it used to be in terms of the amount of adjustability you have with the lacing customization. But with that said, the standard layout that I have them laced up in currently does a really good job in terms of providing really good lockdown. And the upper, despite being so soft and flexible, does have really good structure to it. This is the mid-cut version. There's also a low. Both are pretty much equally as good. It's just a matter of personal preference in regards to more so the look rather than the fit or comfort. And then the sole plate and stud pattern, it's unchanged from previous Puma Futures. Really good sole plate, FGAG stud pattern, super aggressive. It's just a very well-rounded pair of football boots. At the 4th spot, I have the Made in Japan Mizuno Rebula 3, which is my replacement for the Nike Tiempo Legend 7 Elite that I had on last year's list. I really like that boot. I said it was my personal favorite for a long time, and there was a period where I would have said that the Rebula 3 was my personal favorite boot as well. It fills in the spot of a leather boot with all the modern tech incorporated into the design to elevate the performance of what is kind of a more traditional football boot material at this point. Of course, being a Made in Japan Mizuno product, the build quality is fantastic, and the quality of materials used, especially the kangaroo leather, is phenomenal. This is some of the nicest leather you'll find on any football boot, but it's elevated in terms of performance by way of an internal support cage that's made out of some kind of a memory foam, as you can pretty clearly see with the texturing on the surface. It does a really good job of reinforcing the leather upper, but also doesn't take away from the softness or comfort. So when you pair that with a nice deep, slightly off-centered lacing system, the lockdown is on par with a lot of speed boots out there, but you're still getting the softness and comfort of a leather football boot. It also features a low-cut design. The shape has been completely reworked from the previous generation Rebulas. It's a huge improvement in that regard. The boot is, of course, also nice and lightweight. And then the sole plate and stud pattern, it might not look like anything special, but this is one of my favorite sole plates on the market right now in terms of how it moves so naturally with your feet. Just works extremely well with the upper. And then the stud pattern, again, it might not look like anything special, but it's a lot more aggressive than you might expect. At number 3, we have the only football boot to carry over from last year's list, and that is the Nike Phantom Venom Elite, and rightfully so. This is still one of the best performing football boots on the market for a variety of reasons. Number one, it fits really well and is super comfortable, which is important in any football boot. If they're uncomfortable, the performance characteristics almost don't matter. The Flyknit-based upper is thin, it's soft, it's flexible. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the most sock-like feeling of the knitted upper options out there, but it does feel really nice. There's some added texturing on the surface through the forefoot area that does provide a little bit of additional grip on the ball. And then of course you do have the power precision striking element, which is basically just texturing on the surface. It does make a noticeable difference in terms of feel when striking, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it's going to increase the power or accuracy of your shot in any noticeable way. It does have an off-centered lacing system, and that lacing system does work with an internal fly wire construction, which basically runs from the lacing positions into the base of the sole, providing a ton of extra structure and just making this super responsive. It's very lightweight, and then of course features a sole plate and stud pattern that's kind of a variation of what we used to see from the Hyper Venom Phantom 3. All bladed studs, kind of this chevron shape, if you will, and honestly, it's almost on par with the aggressiveness of the firm ground stud pattern from the Mercurial series. So if you're a fan of the Nike Mercurial, but you want something that has a little bit more width to it and is arguably a little bit more comfortable, but equally as responsive and aggressive, you really can't go wrong with the Venom. At the 2 spot, we have my personal favorite boot at the moment, the Adidas Predator 20.1, which, as you can see, has these very distinctive spikes running through the forefoot and midfoot area here on the medial side. This is what Adidas calls demon skin, and basically these spikes are made out of a rubber material, which when they make contact with the ball, they provide a ton of extra grip, which is why this football boot feels so distinctively different from any other football boot that you can buy right now. It's kind of old school power boot in that regard because we don't really see rubber elements on football boots anymore. But if you are a fan of that feel, you get that from this new Pred 20.1, but without the bulk and heaviness that I think we've come to expect from the power boot category that pretty much doesn't exist anymore. Granted, this is marketed more as a control boot than a power boot, but that grippy characteristic is not only super noticeable when making contact with the ball, but also when it comes to just striking the ball in general. In my opinion, the experience of striking a ball in this Predator is the best of the best out of any football boot. And in terms of performance benefits from the added grip, obviously it's a preference thing, but when it comes to trying to generate spin on the ball, I just feel like you're able to do that a lot more easily with the added grip than without it. So that's something to take into consideration as well. The upper is a pretty standard mesh-based synthetic material. It's not prime knit like the 20 Plus, but it feels pretty well the same. Obviously the 0.1 models do have a lacing system, so the responsiveness, lockdown, adjustability, the overall fit is definitely better on the 0.1 versus the Plus model, which of course is laceless. This is also the low cut variation, which is equally as good as the mid. If you prefer the collar, go for the mid. There's no real performance or price difference. And then as far as the sole plate and stud pattern is concerned, it's a new split sole construction coming from the previous generation of Predator that feels a little bit less bulky. It's a lot more flexible. It certainly has a more lightweight overall construction. And the stud pattern, it's kind of typical Adidas. It's nothing spectacular, but it does get the job done and ultimately doesn't bring down the incredible feeling that you get from the upper of this football boot. Which brings us to what I believe is the best performing football boot on the market right now, the Nike Mercurial Vapor 13 Elite, which in terms of every objective performance category, lockdown, responsiveness, traction, touch on the ball, this just does everything extremely well. It's very difficult to criticize what Nike have done here. Features a Flyknit upper that's reinforced by what they call high tenacity yarns, which is basically a variation of flywire like we used to see on the Mercurial line, but spread out throughout the entire upper. So not only do you get the added structure of something like a flywire, but there's no longer any pressure points. It's just structured all the way through, but somehow it's still super soft and flexible. For as tight as these football boots fit, they're remarkably comfortable. Of course, it's still a Mercurial, so it's gonna have that kind of painted on type of feel where they are to a certain extent squeezing your feet. If that's not something you find comfortable, they're probably not gonna be a great option for you. But if you like that super tight, very one-to-one connection to your football boots, there really isn't anything else quite like this. Obviously, a central lacing system makes a big part of how good the lockdown and adjustability is with this boot. Tie the laces tight and they really do feel like they're super secure. secure. Heel lockdown is fantastic as well. Of course, this is the Vapor, which is the low-cut version. There is also a mid-cut Superfly, which I would say is equally as good if you prefer the collar. Again, go for the Superfly. But in terms of having objectively the best football boot, less material is lighter than more material, so technically I'd give the Vapor the edge. As far as the sole plate and stud pattern is concerned, it has the signature anatomically shaped sole plate that we saw previously introduced on the Mercurial Vapor 11 and Superfly 5 a few years ago. That gives you this really connected feel to the base of the football boot. And then the split sole construction with the FG stud pattern, it's super aggressive. The same layout that we had on the previous generation of Mercurial, but they've actually extended the length of the studs ever so slightly, again, just to make it that much more aggressive. If you just want as much bite as possible when pushing off and changing direction, again, nothing really feels or performs quite like the Vapor 13 Elite. The Adidas X19.1 is a really good pair of football boots, super comfortable, very lightweight, really responsive as well, also pretty decent traction. The reason why this did not crack the top 5 is because I think in terms of being a pure speed boot, the Mercurial does that a little bit better. It's a thinner upper, it's more aggressive traction, it's also a little bit lighter. And then in terms of just comfortable kind of speed boot style football boots, I think that while this is very comfortable, I would again kind of give the edge to the Puma Future 5.1 because it's very similar in terms of weight. I think it's arguably a little bit more comfortable, and it too does provide slightly more aggressive traction. So while this is a very well-rounded product, I don't necessarily think that it's top 5, but definitely top 10. The New Balance FURON V6 Pro is easily the best performing football boot to come from the New Balance brand, and definitely the first boot that they've made that I think could be in the conversation of being a top performer in today's football boot market. With that said, it is maybe a little bit flawed in regards to not being as responsive as it could be, but the trade-off is that they've gone with this knitted upper that is so soft and so flexible, it really does feel like you're wearing a pair of socks. And I don't want to say that it's not responsive, it's just not quite on par with something like a Mercurial Vapor. This upper compares most closely to the Puma Future knitted upper, but again, not as structured. It fits way better than all previous FURON models. It is remarkably comfortable. And then the sole plate and stud pattern is also a huge improvement in terms of aggressiveness when it comes to traction, where as you can see, they have these chevron bladed studs that look to be very similar to what Nike has on the Mercurial series. It's not an exact copy, but it does come pretty close, which is why the performance is so much better than what they've had in the past. The Nike Phantom Vision 2 Elite is an excellent pair of football boots, but it's also very similar to the Phantom Vision that it replaced. It's still an internal quad fit construction with Flyknit on the outside and then a surface that is heavily textured with the Nike Skin top layer, which is unique in comparison to other Nike models. Again, in terms of added grip on the ball, I don't think that it's on the same level as something like the Adidas Predator 20, whether it's the Plus or the 0.1, so it's not as special in that regard, but from a fit, comfort, and lockdown standpoint, if you're after the most sock-like feel of any football boot out there right now, this is arguably your very best option. Not to mention it's lighter than you might expect. And again, the sole plate and stud pattern hasn't really changed from the previous generation, but it's still very aggressive, and the boot as a whole is very well rounded. So I don't necessarily think it's quite top 5, but it easily could be depending on what your preferences are. The Adidas COPA 20 Plus is arguably the most flawed football boot that I'll feature in this video. Obviously, its laceless design does lead to downfalls in regards to overall fit, as well as lockdown and responsiveness. It's not particularly lightweight. The sole plate and stud pattern is somewhat unextraordinary, but what this boot does, arguably better than everything else in this video, is the touch on the ball and the comfort as well. It is a very comfortable boot, I will admit that. This is, in my opinion, the best laceless boot you can buy, but the Fusion Skin upper combining kangaroo leather, which eventually flows into a prime knit-based synthetic material, is fantastic. The leather is as soft as it gets. It's really, really thin as well. So the experience when making contact with the ball, which is a big part of a pair of football boots, is truly phenomenal. And then my final honorable mention, the Made in Japan Mizuno MORELIA Neo 2 Beta, which I would easily have in my top 5 if it wasn't a limited edition release. So it doesn't quite meet the criteria. I'm not even sure if this is still readily available. And I'll also say the regular Neo 2 is definitely a top 10 best performing football boot. It's just not necessarily my cup of tea. But what I love about the Neo 2 Beta is its overall comfort. They've modified the material through the midfoot, which I think is a lot more forgiving. It's arguably not as responsive as the regular Neo 2, but it just fits my feet a lot better and just works overall. And you also get kangaroo leather in the forefoot as you're used to, but it's been thinned out ever so slightly. So the overall experience across the entire foot feels more balanced than a regular Neo 2. It's a little bit more flexible, a little bit more pliable, and realistically, this is one of the only football boots that I've ever worn that feels like they disappear on your feet. They're so comfortable, they're so lightweight, but at the same time, they still wrap your foot very closely, giving you that one-to-one connection. The responsiveness is definitely there. And then as far as the sole plate and stud pattern is concerned, it's a little bit more of a traditional looking layout, but more aggressive than I think most people would expect. Obviously, it makes for a nice lightweight design, but this is one of those stud patterns that you either love or hate. More traditional, of course, which isn't for everybody, but as an overall package, I just think that the Neo 2 Beta is a really special pair of football boots. And there you have it, my picks for the top 5 best performing football boots of 2020. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave your own personal list down below in the comment section. Again, if you're interested in any of these boots for yourself, Buy It Now links are down below in the description with SR4U coupon codes to get them below their normal retail prices. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down below in the comments and I'll do my best to get an answer out to you. If you are new to the channel and don't want to miss out on future content from me, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on when the next new video goes live. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one.